For many, the golden era of Hollywood conjures an image of sparkling gowns, elegant premieres, and legendary stars who seemed larger than life. Yet, behind that glamorous curtain lay an industry wrestling with its own deeply rooted prejudices. Some of the most cherished icons of the 1930s through the 1950s harbored troubling views that, in today's world, would shock their devoted fans. This isn't a story meant to tear down legends, but rather to look more closely at the humanity behind the celebrity. A reminder that fame doesn't erase flaws, and sometimes what we see on screen is only half the truth. But be warned, once you learn what lurked behind the scenes, it may forever change how you see those timeless black and white movies. Let's journey back to the era of big studios and bigger personalities, where four beloved figures left footprints not only on cinema, but also on a darker side of Hollywood's history. A glimpse into an illusion. In the mid-20th century, Hollywood turned into a dream factory, churning out films that captivated the world. Audiences filled theaters to watch stories about heroic cowboys defending the frontier, crooners with velvet voices melting hearts, and wise old men on ranches or small-town streets teaching moral lessons. People left these films feeling uplifted, entertained, and inspired. But as the cameras stopped rolling and the stage lights dimmed, different versions of these beloved stars sometimes emerged, ones that contradicted the wholesome personas projected on screen. The studio system of the day was a tightly controlled environment. PR teams guarded celebrities' images fiercely, ensuring that damaging rumors seldom made headlines. Paparazzi barely existed in the way we know today, and social media was unthinkable. Many stars were thus shielded from public accountability for behaviors or beliefs that might now be considered deeply offensive. Racism, sexism, and other forms of prejudice were often swept under the proverbial red carpet, allowing some of Hollywood's brightest lights to keep shining. Before we unravel the controversies surrounding John Wayne, James Stewart, Bing Crosby, and Walter Brennan, four men seemingly cut from the cloth of classic Americana, let's set the stage. This era wasn't just about glamorous premieres and star-studded banquets. It was also a period when segregation was lawful across much of the United States, where civil rights demonstrations were still decades away from major victories, and where stereotypes frequently seeped into mainstream entertainment. Viewers around the globe consumed Hollywood's narratives, which were sometimes rife with portrayals that would be unthinkable today. The biggest question looming over these old classics is whether the stars themselves truly believed in the discriminatory messages many of their films subtly or overtly projected. And in certain cases, the uncomfortable answer appears to be yes. James Stewart, cracks in the all-American facade. If John Wayne personified the rugged frontier hero, James "Jimmy" Stewart presented himself as America's gentle everyman. With his soft-spoken manner and earnest gaze, he quickly became a star who seemed like the model neighbor, always ready to lend a helping hand or stand up against injustice. His roles in classics like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and It's a Wonderful Life cemented that persona. Audiences perceived him as wholesome, sincere, and fiercely moral, exactly the kind of man you'd trust to do the right thing. But some who worked alongside him suggest there was another side to the beloved actor, one hidden behind the carefully cultivated image. Rumors emerged of racial prejudices that occasionally appeared during filming, Most of these stories never made the mainstream gossip columns, but people within industry circles shared murmurs about Stewart's reluctance to share scenes or credits with black actors, especially in the 1960s and early 70s. One of the most unsettling incidents discussed involves Stewart allegedly demanding the removal of a black actor, Hal Williams, from a show where they both worked. It's said that the role eventually went to someone else because Stewart expressed discomfort or dissatisfaction. In an era when few people of color achieved equal footing in Hollywood, that alleged action, if accurately recounted, would have struck a severe blow against progress. Of course, not all of Stewart's peers agreed with these accounts. Many described him as gracious and courtly, but it's possible he softened his stance around friends or simply avoided public conflict. Even close relationships, like his decades-long friendship with Henry Fonda, had unspoken tensions. They reportedly had a near falling out over deep political differences, with some insiders recounting that the two eventually agreed never to discuss politics again, recognizing that their disagreements might destroy a cherished friendship. Stewart's example underlines just how powerful a star's image can be. For countless fans, the mere suggestion that he displayed prejudiced behavior feels like a betrayal, clashing with every role they'd seen him play. But in a Hollywood era that valued keeping up appearances, it wasn't difficult for major studios to suppress negative press. Ultimately, Stewart remains an iconic figure in film history, though his memory is now complicated by whispers that America's most affable man may have had attitudes that were anything but neighborly. John Wayne, the cowboy with a controversial code. Imagine the prototypical Western hero, tall in the saddle, a rugged face creased by the desert sun, a drawling voice that instantly commands respect. For most moviegoers of the Golden Era, that picture is John Wayne. Nicknamed the Duke, he epitomized American masculinity and patriotism. His roles defined the Western genre itself, whether riding alongside the U.S. cavalry, defending settlements from raiding outlaws, or avenging frontier injustices. Yet behind those iconic roles, the man named Marion Morrison, John Wayne's real name, carried beliefs that shocked even some of his closest admirers. In a 1971 interview, he openly supported white supremacist viewpoints and criticized movements aimed at equality. This stunned fans who had grown up watching him as a just and noble figure on screen. What was even more distressing for many was how unconcealed his statements were. He showed little sense that his words might cause serious offense or spark lasting outrage. He had also been quoted expressing dismissive views about Native Americans, suggesting that taking land from them was acceptable because they were, in his words, selfishly trying to keep it for themselves. These comments reveal a perspective that matched many outdated attitudes of earlier decades, but still stood out as unsettling even back in the late 60s and early 70s. What truly opened a divide between Wayne's admirers and his critics was that these statements didn't appear to be casual slips of the tongue. They stemmed from a long-held outlook on race and American history. He was known to double down on his opinions when confronted, emphasizing that he felt certain groups had not earned the right to protest their treatment in the United States. Over time, activists and historians revisited Wayne's filmography, noting that some of his roles inadvertently championed themes of conquest or cultural erasure. In the years since his passing, discussions have surfaced about renaming places that honor him, such as the John Wayne Airport in Orange County. Community leaders and some public figures argue that his legacy is at odds with the diverse, inclusive values they want to promote. Others assert that he was a product of his time, a man whose personal views shouldn't overshadow his cinematic contributions. But as more people confront uncomfortable truths about America's past, Wayne's name continues to provoke debates, forcing fans to reevaluate whether the heroic cowboy was truly the paragon of virtue they had once believed. Bing Crosby, the crooner's off-key moments. The moment you hear his soothing rendition of White Christmas, you can't help but think of snowy winter evenings and cozy gatherings by the fire. Bing Crosby's voice was one of the defining sounds of the 1940s and 50s, carrying warmth and familiarity across radio waves and movie screens worldwide. He was the guy who made everyone feel at ease, whether singing on stage or bantering with Bob Hope in a Road to comedy film. Yet for all that charm, Crosby sometimes participated in performances and used language that would be extremely troubling to viewers today. Like many entertainers of his generation, he occasionally performed in blackface, a practice that drew on older minstrel traditions and reinforced harmful stereotypes about African Americans. One especially infamous example occurred in the musical numbers he recorded for various films, including the 1954 classic White Christmas, which showcased a piece from earlier minstrel shows. It wasn't just on screen. Allegations from certain acquaintances and co-workers suggest that Crosby used racial epithets casually in private conversations. This wasn't unusual in an era when slurs were distressingly common among many Americans. But it's jarring to realize that the man whose voice exuded kindness could embrace language that excluded and demeaned people. Interestingly, Bing Crosby was also known to socialize and collaborate with black musicians, such as Louis Armstrong. He's even credited with giving some African American performers a wider platform in certain projects, an action that, on the surface, signaled open-mindedness. Those who admired him often cite these partnerships as evidence that Crosby was more progressive than many of his peers. But can an individual champion an inclusive stance publicly while still indulging in derogatory acts or language privately? This contradiction is central to Crosby's legacy. Just like other major stars of his day, he was a product of a segregated society, with attitudes shaped by the era's prejudice. Decades after his death, film and music historians began re-examining the comedic segments featuring blackface or racially tinted humor. While many remain fans of his gorgeous baritone and classic holiday specials, they also acknowledge the complicated truths behind them. An artist whose melodic gifts enchanted millions, yet who occasionally missed the ethical note. Walter Brennan, America's grandfather, or firebrand. Think of the kindly old coot in a Western, always ready with a wry comment about "them dang kids," or the lovable sidekick wobbling into a saloon with comedic flair. Walter Brennan fit that archetype so seamlessly that he became synonymous with the role of a grumpy yet affectionate mentor or neighbor. His gravelly voice and weathered face made him appear like the kindly grandpa you might see whittling on a front porch. But behind the sweet, sometimes comical facade, Brennan reportedly possessed intense political and social beliefs that startled those who probed a bit deeper. He was a known member of the John Birch Society, an organization infamous for its extreme anti-communist stance and controversial positions on civil rights. Brennan didn't just sign up quietly. Rumors persist that he was outspoken to the point of zeal, going so far as to keep a bunker on his property for what he believed was an inevitable invasion. Where it gets especially troubling is in his reactions to the civil rights movement of the 1960s. He allegedly referred to activist groups as communist plots designed to fracture America. Some accounts even claim that upon learning about tragedies involving civil rights leaders, he responded with callous remarks devoid of sympathy. If accurate, these stories illustrate a man whose personal convictions clashed dramatically with the warm, grandfatherly image that audiences adored. It's a reminder of how easily Hollywood's illusions can shape perceptions. Brennan's 3 Academy Awards and a celebrated filmography made him a household name, yet the tabloids of his time rarely spotlighted his harshest opinions. Even in the tight-knit circles of old Hollywood, people often stuck to their lanes. Actors might have argued politics in private, but public feuds were relatively rare, especially if they could tarnish an established star's marketability. Brennan exemplifies a pattern observed among other Golden Era celebrities: the ability to charm fans through a character that seems authentic, all while maintaining a personal philosophy that's miles away from what's portrayed on screen. He remains a fascinating figure for film buffs, many of whom now watch his performances with new eyes, questioning how well they ever really knew the man behind that kindly old grin. The Great Divide, Art versus Artist. As we look at these 4 icons, John Wayne, James Stewart, Bing Crosby, and Walter Brennan, we start to see a pattern. Each was undeniably talented, leaving behind film performances that continue to captivate new generations. Their movies and music remain cultural touchstones, from epic Western showdowns to gently crooned lullabies that mark the holiday season. But with the revelations about their personal beliefs, we must wrestle with a broader societal question. Should we separate an artist's work from their personal conduct? On one hand, their contributions to cinema and music arguably transcend an individual's flaws. Wayne's presence gave Westerns a signature style. Stewart's earnest performances opened the door for more nuanced leading men. Crosby's voice shaped the soundscape of mid-century America, and Brennan's comedic timing influenced how the old sidekick would be portrayed for decades. Their creative achievements are, beyond doubt, interwoven with the tapestry of American entertainment. On the other hand, many believe that continuing to celebrate such stars without examining their biases can signal a tolerance or even endorsement of those harmful views. For modern audiences, it's an ongoing dilemma. Some decide it's possible to cherish the artistry while condemning the prejudice, while others find it impossible to watch a film or listen to a tune without remembering the star's actions or beliefs. In many ways, the debate is a microcosm of the broader challenges we face when dealing with historical figures in general. Given that the Golden Era was steeped in widely accepted discrimination, racial separation was still lawful in much of the U.S., and many Americans held beliefs now seen as outdated. Some argue that these men were merely products of their time. But even in those days, there were voices of opposition, activists who fought for equality, and celebrities who opposed mainstream prejudice. So it's equally fair to say that these stars had a choice. They could have embraced a more inclusive stance, but often did not. Reckoning with a legacy. The conversation around rewriting or removing honors for stars like John Wayne from airports or public institutions reflects a broader push to acknowledge history more honestly. Similar movements are happening across various fields, tearing down statues of slave owners, renaming schools that honored segregationists, and so on. In Hollywood, the re-examination has opened deeper inquiries about how the film industry perpetuated stereotypes or whitewashed entire chapters of American society. For fans, this can feel deeply personal. Classics from the golden era are woven into holiday traditions, family memories, and cultural touchstones. Suddenly discovering that a beloved star may have harbored hateful ideas is like learning that a kindly grandparent once held shockingly harsh views. It doesn't erase the happy memories, but adds a complicated layer of sadness or anger. Critics of canceling older figures argue that removing them from public spaces erases history and denies future generations the chance to learn from past mistakes. Others counter that these tributes are not neutral. They represent an approval of the individual's life and achievements. Regardless of where one stands, the debates reflect a society increasingly unwilling to brush aside racism, even if it's from decades ago. What's perhaps most instructive is how these revelations remind us that society is always evolving. Views once accepted in mainstream culture can become abhorrent just a couple of generations later. And if we want to understand how prejudice still thrives, we need to see how it was permitted to flourish in the past, even among the biggest icons in entertainment. Reckoning with a legacy. The conversation around rewriting or removing honors for stars like John Wayne from airports or public institutions reflects a broader push to acknowledge history more honestly. Similar movements are happening across various fields, tearing down statues of slave owners, renaming schools that honored segregationists, and so on. In Hollywood, the re-examination has opened deeper inquiries about how the film industry perpetuated stereotypes or whitewashed entire chapters of American society. For fans, this can feel deeply personal. Classics from the golden era are woven into holiday traditions, family memories, and cultural touchstones. Suddenly discovering that a beloved star may have harbored hateful ideas is like learning that a kindly grandparent once held shockingly harsh views. It doesn't erase the happy memories, but adds a complicated layer of sadness or anger. Critics of canceling older figures argue that removing them from public spaces erases history and denies future generations the chance to learn from past mistakes. Others counter that these tributes are not neutral. They represent an approval of the individual's life and achievements. Regardless of where one stands, the debates reflect a society increasingly unwilling to brush aside racism, even if it's from decades ago. What's perhaps most instructive is how these revelations remind us that society is always evolving. Views once accepted in mainstream culture can become abhorrent just a couple of generations later. And if we want to understand how prejudice still thrives, we need to see how it was permitted to flourish in the past, even among the biggest icons in entertainment.